The chamber was built to make visitors feel small. That was the point of it. Every species that had ever walked through the great bronze doors of the Galactic Council Hall on Vethera Prime had felt it, that slow drain of confidence, that quiet reminder of where they stood. The ceiling climbed 400 meters above the floor. The seats of the 9 council species curved in a half-moon above the central platform, raised so high that the delegates below had to tilt their heads back just to make eye contact. The walls were carved from black stone pulled from the oldest asteroid field in the galaxy, and the stone had tiny stars trapped inside it, frozen light from suns that had died 1 billion years ago. It was built to say, "You are nothing. We are everything." Ambassador Mara Chen walked to the center platform and looked up. She was 53 years old. She had gray in her hair and old scars on both hands from a mining accident on Europa when she was 22. She stood 1.65 meters in her flat shoes and weighed 61 kilograms. She did not look impressive. She did not try to. She looked up at the 9 council faces above her and waited. Councillor Veth of the Dracian Collective spoke first. He always did. His species had run the council for 400 years, and they moved through the galaxy with the slow confidence of something that had never once been told no. "Ambassador Chen." His voice came through the translation matrix, flat and precise. "You have been summoned to receive the formal ruling of the Galactic Council regarding the human collective. This ruling was passed by a vote of 7-2. It is binding. It is final. You are not here to argue it. You are here to receive it." Mara let the silence sit for a moment after he finished. "Understood," she said. Veth touched the glowing plate on his desk. A document appeared on the screens that lined the chamber walls. Every delegate, every observer, every reporter in the gallery above could read it. Mara had already read it 3 times on the transport from Earth. She read it again now, on the wall, because the words still felt unreal, even after 3 readings. By unanimous direction of the presiding majority of the Galactic Council, the human collective, registered member species 1,847, is hereby stripped of its council membership, its interstellar trade agreements, its shared technology access rights, and its territorial recognitions in the central spiral. The human collective is granted a period of 90 standard days to remove all personnel and assets from council-recognized space. The human collective is assigned resettlement territory in Sector 9, Vareth, commonly referred to as the Vareth Expanse, where they may establish independent habitation under restricted status. Entry into council space by human vessels, without prior authorization, will be treated as an act of aggression. It went on. There were 17 more paragraphs. They all said the same thing in different ways. "You are done here. Go away and don't come back." Councillor Veth folded his 4-fingered hands together. "Do you have any questions about the terms?" "Several," Mara said. "But I'll start with the important one." She tilted her head back to look at him. "Which 2 voted against?" A small noise moved through the gallery. Something between surprise and amusement. Veth's face did not change. "That is not relevant to. It's relevant to me." She looked along the row of council faces. She already knew. The Torvani and the Kashari, the 2 smallest species on the council. The 2 that humanity had spent the most time trading with, building relationships with, actually talking to, like equals, rather than subjects. She could see it in how they held themselves, slightly apart from the others. She nodded at them both, very slightly. They didn't nod back. They couldn't. But the Torvani delegate, a young female named Sura, let her secondary eyelids drop for just a moment. "We tried. The grounds?" Mara said, turning back to Veth. "I want the grounds stated clearly, on the record, in this chamber, not in the document." Out loud, Veth was quiet for a moment. She could tell he did not like her. Species representatives usually tried to hide that. He had stopped trying somewhere around the 3rd year of the Terracon border dispute. "The human collective has demonstrated," he said, "a consistent pattern of unilateral aggression, disregard for council mediation processes, unauthorized military expansion, and cultural instability, incompatible with peaceful galactic coexistence." Cultural instability. Correct. "You mean we don't do what we're told?" "I mean," Veth said, his voice dropping slightly, "that your species has been a member of this council for 47 years. In that time, you have been involved in 11 border disputes. You have violated trade exclusion zones on 33 documented occasions. You have made independent contact with restricted species on 4 occasions. You have refused council arbitration 7 times. And you started a war. We finished a war, Mara said. The Velhari started it when they bombed 3 of our colony stations and killed 8,000 people. We asked the council to act. The council spent 14 months forming a committee. So yes, we finished the war ourselves. Without authorization. Without permission. She corrected. Those are different things. The chamber was very quiet. Veth looked at her with something that was not quite contempt, and not quite respect, and sat somewhere between the two, which she found more interesting than either. The ruling stands. Ambassador. The vote was taken. The terms are set. You have 90 days. Mara looked up at all 9 faces one more time. The Drassians, who had run this galaxy like a private club for 4 centuries. The Govani, who controlled every major shipping lane in the central spiral. The Pelhari Combine, who owned the patents on most jump drive technology and made sure everyone knew it. The Sorrenti, who had the largest fleet and the smallest conscience. 7 of 9. She thought about the 8,000 dead on the Velhari border. She thought about the 14 months of committees. She thought about 47 years of being patted on the head and told to wait their turn. I have a statement, she said. For the record is closed. I'm making one anyway. She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. You're making a mistake. Not a political mistake. Not a diplomatic one. A fundamental one. You looked at my species and you saw the aggression and the arguments and the refusals, and you decided we were a problem to be managed. You never once asked why we are the way we are. She paused. We survived. That's why. We survived ice ages and plagues and 2 of our own extinction events before we ever left our planet. We survived by fighting when we had to and building when we could and never, not once, accepting that the situation we were in was the situation we were stuck with. She looked at Veth. You're sending us to Vareth. I know what Vareth is. Dead rock and cold vacuum and nothing worth having. She let that sit. We've been there before. On our own planet. We know what to do with nothing. Nobody spoke. 90 days, she said. We'll be out in 60. She walked back through the bronze doors without waiting to be dismissed. She was right about 60 days. 58, actually. The human ships that left council space were not impressive. They were not meant to be. They were freighters and colony transports and 3 old military escorts that the council had technically ordered decommissioned 2 years ago, and that Earth had technically not gotten around to decommissioning. They carried people, and equipment, and seed stock, and medical supplies, and data cores, with every piece of research, and every technical document, and every map and schematic that human engineers had spent 47 years quietly. Copying, not stealing, copying. Everything they had paid for with trade credits and labor and lives. Everything they had earned and been told they only had access to, not ownership of. They took the copies. Mara watched the last of the fleet jump from a viewport on the Endurance, the heaviest of the military escorts. She had requested this ship specifically because it was the oldest and slowest. She wanted to be last. She wanted to watch council space disappear from behind her. She had a glass of water in her hand. Not wine, not something ceremonial, just water. The stars shifted as the Endurance made its jump. Council space was gone. She drank her water and went to find somewhere to sleep. The Vareth expanse was, by any reasonable measure, the worst real estate in the known galaxy. It sat at the trailing edge of the Orion Arm, past the last of the useful star systems, in a region that the early survey maps had marked with the galactic equivalent of here be nothing. The stars out here were old and cold and far apart. The worlds that orbited them were mostly rock, tidally locked, atmospherically dead, or wrapped in gases that would dissolve the lining of a human lung in under a minute. The Council had been generous enough to assign humanity 42 systems in this region. 42 systems containing, between them, 0 Class M worlds, 4 marginally breathable atmospheres that required filtering, 17 asteroid fields, and 1 brown dwarf that wasn't quite a star, and wasn't quite a planet, and wasn't particularly useful as either. Admiral Yusuf Okafor, commanding the fleet, pulled up the survey data on his display and looked at it for a long time. Well, he said. His aide, a young lieutenant named Patel, was standing at his elbow waiting for the rest of the sentence. It didn't come. Okafor closed the display. Get me the engineering leads, he said. All of them, right now. Patel went. Okafor walked to the viewport and looked at the dead stars of the Vareth expanse and did not let himself think about what he had left behind his house, on the coast of what used to be Nigeria, the restaurant, on the corner, the smell of rain on warm ground. He did not let himself think about any of that because there was no version of this where thinking about it helped. He thought instead about the survey data. 4 marginally breathable atmospheres. That was something. 17 asteroid fields. That was metal. That was material. The brown dwarf was useless until it wasn't, and he had 3 engineers on his staff who had written doctoral theses on unconventional energy extraction and who had been very bored for the last 2 years. He thought about what Mara Chen had said in that chamber. We know what to do with nothing. He turned from the viewport. There was work to start. They called the first world Ember. Not because it was warm, it wasn't. Not exactly. The atmosphere was thin, and the surface temperature averaged -12 Celsius, and the wind off the northern poles was the kind of cold that got into machinery and made it stupid. They called it Ember because of what was underneath the surface. Thermal vents running from a still active core, deep enough that the surface was dead but the rock below it was alive with heat. Geothermal energy. Not much. Enough. The first structures went up in prefab panels bolted together in the cold. People worked in suits and slept in pressurized tents and ate from ration packs and did not complain, mostly because complaining required energy they needed for other things. The children were the hardest part. There were 11,000 children in the fleet. They had been born on Earth or on the older colonies, Titan, Europa, Mars, and they remembered green things and open sky and food that didn't come from a sealed pouch. The parents tried to make it feel like an adventure. Some of them were very good at this. Others were less good. In the pressurized tent cities on Ember's southern plateau, you could hear, some nights, a child asking when they were going home. The adults had different answers. Some said soon, some said we are home, some said nothing at all. Mara Chen, who had no children of her own, sat with a 7-year-old boy named Theo one evening when his mother was working a double shift on the geothermal rig. Theo had been crying, not loudly, just the small, steady kind of crying that comes from being very tired and very confused. Are we in trouble? He asked her. She thought about lying. She was a diplomat. She was very good at it. Yes, she said. Theo thought about this. Are we going to be okay? She looked at the tent walls, thin as paper between them and the killing cold outside. She looked at the lights strung from the roof. Warm yellow, powered by a geothermal tap that 3 engineers had built from parts stripped from 3 different systems, because none of them had been designed for this, but all of them had been smart enough to make it work anyway. Yes, she said. She meant that one too. Outside, the wind hit the tent like a fist. The lights flickered once and held. Theo wiped his face on his sleeve and fell asleep against her arm. Mara sat in the cold yellow light and thought about 42 useless star systems and the 17 asteroid fields. She had not stopped thinking about since she read the survey data and the 3 bored engineers with doctoral theses on unconventional energy extraction and the 11,000 children who were going to grow up out here and not know any world except this one. They would be different, those children. She was not sure yet if that was a good thing. She was pretty sure the Galactic Council was going to find out. 22 years after the Exile, a Drassian intelligence probe passed through the outer edge of the Vareth expanse on a routine survey run. The probe was automated. It had been doing this particular loop every 4 years since before Mara Chen was born, passing through the dead zone and recording nothing because there was nothing to record, and sending its nothing data back to the Council archives, where no one looked at it, because why would they? This time the probe's sensors flagged something. The flag was low priority. Dead zone anomaly, the system tagged it. The data sat in the Council archive queue for 11 months, before a junior analyst named Sovi pulled it for a routine audit clearance. She looked at it for a long time. Then she pulled it again, because she thought her display was malfunctioning. It was not malfunctioning. She took it to her supervisor. Her supervisor took it to his department head. The department head called a private meeting with 2 members of the Drassian Intelligence Committee. And that meeting went very long. And when it was over, all 4 of them sat quietly for a while looking at the data. The probe had recorded 11 active settlements across 3 systems, orbital stations, mining infrastructure on 6 asteroid bodies, what appeared to be a functioning shipyard at the 4th planet of Verath, 7 power signatures consistent with industrial manufacturing at 2 sites on the surface of a world the survey maps had listed as uninhabitable, and ships, 41 ships on the probe's sensors, moving between the settlements in regular patterns, not military, not yet, but built, purpose-built, with drive signatures that didn't match any known human design from before the Exile. They've been busy, the department head said. Nobody laughed. Jakob Reyes had been on Ember for 19 of his 41 years. He had arrived as a 22-year-old structural engineer with a head full of theory and absolutely no practical experience with the specific problem of building pressurized habitats on a world that actively wanted to kill you, he had learned. The learning had cost him 2 fingers on his left hand frostbite. Year 3. A stupid mistake he never made again, and most of his hair, which had gone white by the time he was 35, not from age but from stress. Or so his wife Amara claimed. And she was probably right. He ran the construction authority for Ember now, a title that sounded important and mostly meant he spent 14 hours a day solving problems that should not have been possible to solve. Today's problem was the dome on Ember's northern agricultural sector, which had developed a microfracture along its eastern seam that the automated sealant system had failed to catch because the automated sealant system was 12 years old and running on components that had been repaired so many times. They were barely recognizable as the original parts anymore. Jakob was inside the dome, standing on a scaffold 40 meters up, looking at the fracture with a light and his remaining 8 fingers and his eyes. Below him, 2,000 square meters of hydroponic growing racks stretched out in rows, wheat and soy, and the engineered leafy greens that the nutritionists had spent 8 years modifying to grow in artificial light. Real food. Actual food that grew in actual soil, even if the soil was processed. Substrate built from asteroid rock and bacterial cultures, and a great deal of very precise chemistry. This dome fed 30,000 people. The fracture was 8 centimeters long. It would be 40 centimeters long by morning if he didn't do something about it right now. He had the right materials. He always had the right materials now that had taken 7 years to get right. The supply chain, the mining operations, the processing facilities, but it was right now and he was proud of that in the way he was proud of all of it. Quietly and without ceremony. The way you're proud of something that almost killed you. He worked for 3 hours on the scaffold in the cold filtered air of the dome, sealing the fracture millimeter by millimeter with a process he had invented himself in year 9 because the standard process hadn't worked and he'd been out of options. And it had been that, or let the dome fail. The wheat moved gently below him in the circulation fans. When he was done, he climbed down and walked out through the airlock and stood for a moment on the surface of Ember, looking up at a sky that was dark amber at the edges from the distant cold sun. His breath made clouds. His suit's heater made a small complaining sound it had been making for 2 months that he kept meaning to fix. He thought, not for the first time, about the planet he had grown up on. About the sky there, blue and deep and full of clouds that moved and changed shape. About the smell of cut grass. He was 30 years old before he understood that cut grass had a smell. He hadn't known. He had never thought to wonder about it when he had it. He did not let himself think about this often. There was no useful version of it. He walked back toward the settlement. The thing that the Dracian probe had missed because it was looking for the things it knew to look for was what was happening underground. In the early years, building underground had been necessity. The surface of most Verath worlds was hostile. Radiation, cold, toxic chemistry in the upper atmosphere. You went underground to survive. You went underground because it was warmer and safer, and you could seal it and pressurize it and make it something a human body could exist in without a suit. What nobody had planned was what happened when you put several 100,000 humans underground with nothing to do in their off hours except think. They had brought the libraries. All of them. The data cores that left council space held copies of every book, every scientific paper, every engineering manual, every historical record, every medical database, every archive that humanity had assembled in its entire recorded existence. They had brought it all, and underground on the Verath worlds, with limited entertainment and no council oversight and nothing but time between shifts, people read. And then they started talking to each other across the settlement network. And then, because humans are what they are, they started arguing. The arguments were mostly productive. The engineers argued about structure and materials and drive design. The scientists argued about biology and chemistry and physics. The doctors argued about medicine and nutrition and the specific health effects of living underground under artificial light for years at a time. The teachers argued about curriculum. The politicians argued about governance, about what kind of society they were building out here in the dark, whether it should look like what they'd left, or whether exile had earned them the right to try something new. It was from these arguments, specifically from a 3-year-long running argument between a drive engineer named Petra Vasquez and a physicist named Ro Kim, about whether the standard jump drive equations were actually optimal Or just the ones everyone had agreed on because the council's patents made alternatives financially non-viable? That the Ember drive came. They called it that because that's where they figured it out. On Ember, in a converted storage room that smelled like machine oil and bad coffee, at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. The standard jump drive worked by creating a fold in space using an enormous sustained energy discharge. It was effective. It was reliable. It was also incredibly power-hungry, which was why small ships couldn't do it, and why the fuel costs kept interstellar trade expensive enough that the Govani, who controlled the fuel production, stayed very rich. The Ember drive did not fold space. It did something that Kim spent 45 minutes explaining to Jakob Reyes, who had been pulled out of bed to see it, and that Jakob understood at roughly the 60% level, which was enough. The simplest version was this. Instead of bending space toward you, you pushed yourself sideways through a dimension that space didn't know was there. Lateral. Oblique. Through a gap that the standard physics said didn't exist, and that the standard physics was wrong about. The power requirement was 1/8 that of a standard jump drive. The range was 3 times greater. Jakob stood in the storage room at 2:30 in the morning, looking at the equations on the whiteboard and the very small test device on the workbench that had, 20 minutes ago, displaced a 1-kilogram steel ball 2.3 kilometers to the left and returned it intact. He said nothing for a long time. "Does the council know this is possible?" he finally asked. Petra and Ro looked at each other. "The council scientists would have found it eventually," Ro said. "Maybe. But they didn't. They didn't need to. The standard drive works fine if you're rich enough to pay for the fuel." Ro shrugged. "We weren't." Jakob looked at the steel ball. It sat on the workbench looking completely ordinary. He picked it up. It was cold. He thought about what this meant. He thought about it very carefully, because he was the kind of person who thought about things carefully before he said them. "Tell no one outside this room," he said. "Not yet." Petra frowned. "Why?" "Because right now we have an advantage. A real one. Not a bigger dome, or a better sealant, or a more efficient hydroponic rack. An actual, genuine, structural advantage over every other species in the galaxy." He set the ball down. "I want to know what we're going to do with it before anyone else knows we have it." Mara Chen was 71 years old, and mostly retired when they told her about the drive. She sat in her quarters on Ember she had never left. She had never wanted to, and listened to Jakob explain it, and looked at Kim's equations on the small display, and then sat quietly for a while. "How long to build a full-scale drive?" she asked. "Working version? 2 years. Maybe 18 months if we pull the right teams. And the settlements. Where are we on population? Across all 12 inhabited worlds, we're at 4.2 million, growing. The birth rate out here is..." He paused. "The birth rate is high. People have more children when they're building something, apparently." She had noticed this. She had not commented on it because it was not the kind of thing she commented on. But she had noticed. 4.2 million people. 22 years ago, she had walked through bronze doors and been told to leave. She had walked out with a fleet of ships, and a population that had been afraid and exhausted, and had no idea what they were walking into. 4 million people. 12 worlds. A geothermal city on a planet the survey map said couldn't support life. Agricultural domes feeding populations the first projections had said would starve in 3 years. And now a drive that could outrange and outrun everything in the council's fleet, on 1/8 the fuel. "Put the teams together," she said. 18 months. Jakob nodded and stood to go. "Jakob," he stopped. "The settlements, all 12 of them. They're working together? No division?" "No." She searched for the word. "No walls between them?" He thought about it. "There's friction. There's always friction. But no. No walls." He looked at her. "Out here, there's no room for walls. You need the person next to you. That's true whether they grew up on the coast of Nigeria or the highlands of Chile or the stations of Mars." He paused. "The kids especially. The ones born out here. They don't divide the way we did." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's the most important thing you've told me today." He left. She sat alone and looked at the equations on her display, and thought about 9 council faces looking down from their high curved seats at a woman who was not impressive and not meant to be. She thought about 17 asteroid fields. She thought about what grows in the dark when no one is watching. Then she called her assistant and started drafting the governance framework for what 12 worlds and 4 million people, with their own faster-than-light drive technology, were going to call themselves. She had been thinking about the name for 3 years. She already knew what it was. She just hadn't been ready to say it out loud until now. The Human Republic. She said it twice, quietly, to the empty room. It sounded right. For now. The Krath came for the mining stations in year 31. Nobody at the Galactic Council sent a warning. Nobody at the Council even mentioned it. Which meant, either they didn't know, or they didn't care. And the Human Republic had long since stopped trying to tell the difference. The Krath were not a Council member species. They were, what the Council euphemistically called, an unregistered autonomous collective, which was the diplomatic language for a species that raided, took what they wanted, and moved before anyone could do anything about it. The Council tolerated them at the edges of the galaxy because the Krath were mostly interested in edges, in the dead zones and the ignored places, and because dealing with them properly would have required effort and political will, and the Council had other things to worry about. The Krath had been watching the Verith expanse for 8 years before they moved. They saw the settlements. They saw the infrastructure. They saw no military presence worth noting, a few escort ships. Some point defense platforms around the larger stations. Nothing that looked like it could stop a serious attack. They were not wrong about what they saw. They were very wrong about what they concluded. The first attack hit the asteroid mining Array 7, which processed about 15% of the Republic's total iron output. 3 Krath raider ships, fast and built for grab-and-go operations, dropped out of their equivalent of jump drive travel and started cutting into the station's outer hull. They were inside the station's hull for approximately 11 minutes before the response arrived. The response was not what they expected. What they expected was the usual pattern: civilian operators calling for help, a slow escalation, maybe a defense ship or two that they could handle. The standard shape of raiding an undefended target. What arrived was Commander Sora Chen in the Republic Sword, which was not impressive to look at from the outside, because it had been designed, specifically, not to be impressive to look at from the outside. It was a converted ore freighter, with entirely non-standard internal architecture, and it carried weapons that were not in any database the Krath had access to, because they had been designed and built in the Verith expanse by engineers who had never had access to Council weapons patents, and had therefore been forced to solve the problem of hurting things from scratch. They had solved it differently. The Republic Sword came out of a lateral drive transit, not a fold. Not the signature. The Krath sensors were calibrated to read approximately 300 meters from the leading Krath ship. It was close enough that the Krath captain, by all accounts, had no time to issue a single order before Sora's weapons officer opened up with 3 pulse emitters and a focused gravity shear that the Krath ships had no shielding for because they had never encountered it before. The leading Krath ship lost power entirely. The second one attempted to run. It was fast. The Republic Sword used its lateral drive to appear in front of it. The Krath captain made a decision to ram rather than surrender, which was a very brave decision that accomplished nothing except making a significant amount of debris. The third ship surrendered. Sora took the surviving Krath crew aboard, had them medically assessed, fed, and confined in comfortable quarters, and then spent 3 days composing the message she sent to the Krath governing body. Such as it was, the message was precise and not long. It said that the Human Republic had noted the attack on its infrastructure. It said that the Human Republic considered the Verith expanse and all systems within it to be sovereign human territory. It said that any further incursion into that territory by any Krath vessel would be treated as an act of war. It said that the Krath prisoners would be returned safely when the Krath governing body provided written acknowledgement of the Republic's territorial claim. The Krath governing body took 11 days to respond. They sent acknowledgement. They got their people back. Nobody attacked a human settlement again for 4 years. Sora Chen was Mara Chen's granddaughter, born on Ember in year 3 of the Exile. She was 28 years old when she took the Republic Sword into that engagement. She was 30 when the Republic formally named her Commander of the Northern Defense Arc, which covered the 6 systems most exposed to the outer edges of uninhabited space. She was 34 when the Republic's first purpose-built warship, the Endurance II, named for her grandmother's ship, which had been the last to leave Council space, came out of the Ember shipyard, and she walked its deck and ran her hand along the corridor walls, and felt something she could not name, and did not try to. She was 5'7" and built like someone who had grown up climbing scaffolding because she had grown up climbing scaffolding. She had her grandmother's eyes, which were dark and gave nothing away. She had her father's hands, which were large and capable, and looked like they belonged to someone who built things, even when she was holding a command tablet or sitting in a briefing room. She did not look like a war commander. She had noticed that people expected war commanders to look a particular way, and she had decided early on that this was useful information. By year 35, the Human Republic had 42 inhabited settlements across 18 systems, a population of 9 million, and a fleet of 63 vessels ranging from the converted freighters of the early days to 6 purpose-built warships that the engineers had been quietly improving with every generation of design. The Ember Drive was still a secret, not because the Republic was hiding it. They had decided, in a long and contentious debate in the Republic Assembly, that the decision to reveal it or not should be made deliberately and not stumbled into, so the Republic fleet used it only in sectors where Council probes were not present, which they tracked obsessively, and the drive signature was different enough from standard jump technology that the handful of observations that had been made had been filed as sensor anomalies. The Council still thought of the Human Republic as an exile settlement, a minor irritant that had proven more durable than expected, something to check on occasionally and not think about seriously. The Council was wrong about several things. This was becoming a pattern. The Torvani ambassador made contact in year 36. Not officially. Nothing that went through Council channels. A private message, encrypted and routed through 3 dead relays, before it reached the Republic's main communication hub on Ember. Sora's intelligence staff flagged it. Sora read it herself. The message was from Ambassador Sura of the Torvani, the same Sura who had been a young delegate at the Council the day Mara Chen received the exile verdict. She was older now, higher ranked, and she was not writing on behalf of her government. She was writing on her own. The message said, "We have been watching. We know what you have built. We voted against the exile because we believed it was wrong then. We believe it is wrong now. The Torvani have no formal interest in challenging the Council, but there are 26 species currently on Council restricted status, meaning they are not members, not protected, and not free. There are 6 species that have formally requested Council membership and been denied without explanation for more than a decade. We thought you should know this. We thought you might find it relevant." Below the message was a list of species names and their current situations. It was a detailed list. It had clearly taken some time to put together. At the bottom, a single line. Mara Chen was right. We should have said so at the time. Sora sat with this message for a day before she responded. Then she wrote back, briefly, and asked if Ambassador Sura would be willing to meet in person in a location of her choosing. Sura chose a neutral way station in a system that was technically unclaimed by anyone. They met there, just the 2 of them and minimal staff, and talked for 6 hours. Sura came back with something more valuable than any military asset she could have acquired. She came back with intelligence about every weakness in the Council's internal structure, every species that resented Dracian dominance, every dispute that had been papered over with political compromise and was quietly rotting underneath. She came back, knowing where the cracks were. She also came back with the beginning of something she had not expected, a genuine conversation. A Torvani who had watched her grandmother walk through bronze doors 40 years ago and still thought about it. A species that had voted against exile not out of strategic interest but because it was wrong. She had grown up thinking about the galaxy as a place that had thrown humanity away. She was starting to understand it was more complicated than that. There were voices out there that had not wanted this, that had been ignored. That was important. It was important in a way she was going to think about carefully. Year 38. The incident that changed everything that moved the Human Republic from a growing power to a recognized threat was not a battle. It was a trade negotiation. The Vethari were a mid-tier species in the Council system, mineral-rich but technology-poor, dependent on Govani trade routes for their imports, and paying heavily for the privilege. They made contact with the Republic through quiet channels and asked if there was interest in a trade arrangement. Minerals for technology. Simple commerce. The Republic agreed. The deal was done in standard Republic fashion, straightforward, specific, fair to both sides, no hidden fees, no dependency clauses, no language that would give the Republic leverage over Vethari affairs in 5 years when someone read the fine print. The Vethori found this so unusual that they asked to read the contract 3 more times to make sure they hadn't missed something. They hadn't. The Govani found out 6 months later. They found out because the Vethori's orders through Govani channels had dropped significantly, and the Govani auditors, digging into why, found evidence of the Republic trade deal. The Govani brought it to Counselor Veth. Veth was 89 years old. He was slower than he had been, but not slower in the ways that mattered. He looked at the intelligence report on the Human Republic. The updated one. Not the 11-month-old probe data anymore, the actual current surveillance. And he looked at it for a long time, 42 inhabited settlements, 9 million people. A fleet that intelligence could not fully account for. Drive signatures that didn't match any known technology. An independent trade deal with the Vethari that had been structured to create goodwill rather than leverage. He thought about what the human ambassador had said 40 years ago. We know what to do with nothing. They've been busy, he said. It was the same thing the department head had said 2 years ago. Nobody laughed then either. How do we want to handle this? His aide asked. Veth looked at the report. He thought about the vote, 40 years ago. 7-2. He thought about whether he would make the same vote today. He would. Of course he would. The reasons were the same, but he was beginning to think that the reasons had not accounted for something important. Something about what happens when you exile a species that survived 2 extinction events on its home planet and then hand them 42 star systems and leave them alone for 4 decades. Increased surveillance on all Varith systems, he said. I want full intelligence updates on the Republic fleet. Size, composition, capability. And I want a diplomatic contact, drafted formal, from the Council, acknowledging the Republic's existence as an organized body. His aide looked up. That would constitute implicit recognition of their territorial claim. Yes, Veth said. It would. The Sorrenti won't like it. Veth looked at his aide. The Sorrenti should have thought about that 40 years ago when they cast their vote. He closed the report. The Human Republic had not fired a shot at the Council, had not made a threat, had not done anything that could be formally objected to. They had simply built and traded fairly and made a friend out of an ambassador who'd never forgotten a woman walking through bronze doors. Veth was old enough to recognize the shape of what was coming. He had seen species rise before. He had seen the ones that rose violently and the ones that rose quietly. And the quiet ones were always more dangerous because by the time anyone took them seriously, the moment for easy answers was already gone. He sent the diplomatic contact. He did not expect a warm response. He didn't get one. He got a formal acknowledgement from the Republic Assembly, signed by a speaker he didn't recognize, that said the Republic would consider the Council's communication and respond in due course. Due course turned out to be 3 months. The response, when it came, was 2 pages long, written in precise and very formal Galactic standard, and it said that the Human Republic was open to communication with the Galactic Council, and that it looked forward to a relationship of mutual respect between 2 equal parties. Equal parties. Veth read that phrase 4 times. He thought about the 87 years that separated him from a 22-year-old delegate named Sura, dropping her secondary eyelids at a human woman walking out of this chamber. He thought about what equal parties would mean for a council that had never once, in 400 years, operated as an arrangement of equals. He thought about 9 million people in 42 star systems with drive technology nobody could identify. He thought about the Vethori trade deal and how many other species out there were paying too much to the Govani and quietly wondering if there was another option. He closed the response document. He sat alone in his office for a long time. Outside his window, the capital city of Vethara Prime moved in its ancient, comfortable rhythms, sure of itself, sure of its place, sure that the galaxy was ordered and settled and known. Veth was not sure of any of those things. Not anymore. The Council fleet arrived in Varith space on a Tuesday. Nobody consulted with the Republic about this. Nobody sent a message explaining the purpose of the visit. 112 warships from the Sorrenti Combined Forces, the largest single military in Council space, beautiful and terrifying and chrome-plated in the Sorrenti way, like weapons designed to be photographed, dropped out of their fold drives at the edge of Varith 7 and sat there in a formation that left no reasonable interpretation open. This was not a diplomatic call. Admiral Sora Chen was 51 years old. Her hair had gone gray at the temples and she wore it pulled back hard because she could not stand it in her face when she was thinking. And she was always thinking. She stood on the bridge of the Endurance 2 and looked at the sensor display and counted the Sorrenti ships 3 times to make sure she had the number right. 112. The Republic fleet had 41 warships, plus 23 converted vessels that had weapons but weren't built for combat, plus the stations, which had point defense platforms. She looked at her weapons officer, a young man named Darrow, who had been born on Ember and had never in his life been outside Republic space. How do you feel? She asked him. He thought about it for a moment. Honest answer? Always. I feel like I've been in this exact situation before, he said. Like this is exactly what all of it has been building toward. He paused. And I feel like we're going to win. Sora looked at the sensor display. 112 ships. All of them built with Council technology. All of them running standard fold drives and standard weapons and standard shielding arrays calibrated to fight other ships with standard fold drives and standard weapons and standard shielding arrays. Open a channel, she said. Counselor Veth had not authorized the fleet deployment. This was the part he would spend a long time thinking about afterward, that he had known this was coming, had seen it developing through months of internal council politics, and had failed to stop it in time. The Sorrenti had argued that the Republic's trade with the Vethori was an economic act of aggression. They had argued that the Republic's fleet was an unlicensed military force operating without council sanction. They had argued, more quietly, that allowing a human fleet to exist at its current size and capability level set a precedent that 17 other restricted species would immediately attempt to follow. That last argument had been the one that moved votes. Veth had argued against it. He had argued that the Republic had not attacked anyone unprovoked, that the Krath incident 4 years ago had been defensive, that deploying military force against a species that had committed no formal aggression was a legal and moral stretch that would cost the Council more than it gained. He had lost the vote, 5-2. The Torvani had voted with him, nobody else. When the news reached him that the Sorrenti fleet had already entered Vareth space, already deployed, without waiting for the formal authorization vote to finalize, because the Sorrenti military had been told probably and had interpreted it as yes, Veth sat in his office and was quiet for a long time. Then he sent a private message to Ambassador Sura. The message said, "I am sorry." Sora's channel opened, and she spoke clearly and without preamble. "Sorrenti fleet, this is Admiral Sora Chen of the Human Republic Navy. You are in Republic sovereign territory. Please identify your purpose and authorization. TU." The response came from a Sorrenti admiral named Vorkan, whose voice, through the translation matrix, had the particular flatness of someone who had prepared a speech and was reading it. "Human vessel. By authority of the Galactic Council, this fleet is conducting a compliance inspection of unauthorized military assets in restricted space. All Republic military vessels are ordered to stand down, power down weapons, and await boarding teams for inventory and assessment. Any vessel that does not comply will be considered hostile." End. Sora let the transmission end. She looked at the display. 112 ships. "Tell me about the gap in their eastern formation," she said to her tactical officer, a woman named Priya, who had been with her since the Krath engagement. 400-kilometer spacing between their third and fourth columns, Priya said. "It's a standard Council fleet arrangement. It's designed for fighting other Council standard ships. Their sensors would expect any flanking attempt to come through there at a certain speed range." She paused. "Our lateral transit speed profile is going to read as a sensor ghost at first. They'll have maybe 6 seconds before they realize what they're seeing. And their shields, calibrated for Council standard pulse weapons. Forward-oriented, heavy in front, lighter on the flanks because they don't expect flanking at the speed we can move." Priya looked at her. "It's a good formation for the war they think they're fighting." Sora thought for exactly 1 more second. "All Republic vessels. This is Admiral Chen." She kept her voice level and exact. "The Sorrenti fleet is in our space without legal authorization and has issued an unlawful ultimatum. We are not standing down. We are not powering down. We are going to protect our territory and our people. That is what we are here for. All ships, activate lateral drives and begin the Ember pattern." She paused. "For everyone who was born out here, this is what all of it was for. Don't waste it." She closed the channel and looked at Darrow. "Fire when we're through. The Battle of Vareth 7 lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. It should have been a slaughter. 112 ships against 64. Standard military analysis would have given the Republic no real chance. Would have recommended surrender as the only viable option. Standard military analysis did not account for the Ember drive. The Republic fleet did not fight the Sorrenti fleet the way the Sorrenti fleet expected to be fought. They did not come at them in formation, ship against ship, exchanging fire at ranges the Sorrenti weapons were optimized for. They came laterally, appearing inside the Sorrenti formation, firing at shield segments that were never designed to absorb fire from that angle, and then transitioning out before the Sorrenti guns could reorient. Not every transit worked. 3 Republic ships misjudged their exit points and came out too close to Sorrenti vessels and took fire before they could correct. One of them, the Quick March, took a direct hit to its drive section and went dark. Sora saw it on the display and held the knowledge in her chest like a stone. and did not stop giving orders because stopping was not an option. The Sorrenti were not incompetent. They adapted slowly, because adapting to something you have never seen requires time, but they adapted. They began firing at the transit signatures. They began spreading their formation to deny the Republic fleet easy lateral exits. They were good at what they did. The problem was that they were good at a thing that was not the thing they needed to be good at. 2.5 hours in, 11 Sorrenti ships had been disabled and 4 destroyed. The Republic had lost 2 ships. The Sorrenti Admiral Vorkan made a decision that was, from a military standpoint, reasonable. He began to concentrate his forces, pulling back to a tighter formation, trying to create a space where the Republic's lateral drive advantages were minimized. He pulled back toward the edge of the system, into the asteroid field at Vareth, 7's outer boundary, where the Republic had spent 30 years placing things that were not on any chart the Sorrenti had been given. The Republic's defensive infrastructure was not beautiful. It was not chrome-plated. It was built from asteroid rock and salvaged components and 30 years of extremely motivated engineering, and it had been designed for exactly this. For a larger fleet, trying to use the asteroid field as cover. When the Sorrenti formation crossed into the field, the automated defense network activated. It was not a massacre. Sora had not built it to be a massacre. It was a box, a set of overlapping fields of fire that made the Sorrenti formation untenable, that forced ships to scatter, that broke the concentrated formation Vorkan had been building. Ships that scattered became vulnerable to the Republic fleet that was already in lateral position around the field's edges. At 4 hours and 11 minutes, Admiral Vorkan transmitted a request for ceasefire. Sora granted it immediately. She granted it because she was not here to destroy a fleet. She was here to demonstrate something, and the demonstration was complete. The ceasefire was temporary, everyone understood this, and both sides used it to communicate back to their respective governing bodies. Vorkan reported to the Council. Sora reported to the Republic Assembly. Then Sora did something nobody expected. She called Vorkan directly, on a private channel, and asked if his wounded needed assistance. The Quick March was dark but not destroyed, and its crew were alive in emergency suits. She asked if Sorrenti medical teams wanted access to Republic medical facilities on Vareth, 7 for their own casualties. Vorkan was quiet for a long time. Why? He asked. Because your people are hurt, Sora said. And we have the facilities. She paused. And because I don't want to fight you again. Another long pause. What do you want? Vorkan asked. Not hostile. Genuinely asking. Recognition? Sora said. Of our territory, of our sovereignty, of our right to exist as an independent power. That's it. That's the whole list. We're not asking for council membership back. We're not asking for trade rights or access or anything we don't already have. She looked at the display. At the scattered Sorrenti formation, at the asteroids of Vareth, 7 that her people had spent 30 years turning into something. We just want them to stop pretending we're not here. The Republic Assembly met in emergency session 3 days later. The debate ran for 16 hours. At the end of it, the vote was not close. The Human Republic formally dissolved. What replaced it was not smaller, and not quieter, and did not use the word republic. Because a republic was something that asked permission to exist, and they were past asking. The human empire. Not because they wanted to conquer, not because they planned to rule species that did not want to be ruled. The name was a statement of fact. The same way the sky was a statement of fact, and the cold was a statement of fact, and the dead stars of the Vareth expanse were a statement of fact. They had built something here. They had built it out of nothing, and cold and exile, and the specific stubbornness of a species that had never once accepted the situation it was born into. It was an empire. They were going to call it one. Sora Chen, standing before the assembly, as the vote was announced, felt something move through her that she did not know how to name. Her grandmother had stood in a bronze-doored chamber 40 years ago and been told to leave. Her grandmother had walked through those doors and not looked back. She thought about Mara Chen, who had died on Ember 8 years ago, in her quarters, at the age of 79, and who had asked, near the end, to be buried on the surface of the planet rather than inside it. They had built a pressurized memorial dome for her, out on the amber-lit plateau. The wheat fields were visible from inside it. Sora thought about the children who had cried in the pressurized tents, asking when they were going home. They were home. They had always been going to be home here. It had just taken time to build it. The Empire stands, she said. It was not a speech. It was an announcement of a fact. The assembly responded with something between applause and something older, the sound of people who had been told they were nothing, discovering that they had become something entirely else. Outside the assembly dome, on the surface of ember, the amber sky did what it always did. It didn't care what anything was called. The wind came off the northern pole and the dome held, as it always had, as it was built to.